Noob School. All right, welcome back to the Noob School. John Sterling here. I believe this is episode 121 for those keeping track at home. Today I've got a good friend from Greenville, Mark Johnston. Mark claims to be a local, even though he's not. He's only been living here, 30 years?
Yep.
So, I don't know. We'll have to debate that. But Mark owns and started Community Journals, which is a number of publications, both print and digital, that cover various aspects of doing business in, living in, being an artist in, every kind of thing I can think of in Greenville that involves Greenvillians. So when you read about it, you kind of looking in there for maybe I was in a picture somewhere kind of thing. At least I look at it that way. But very big part of our community, all these different publications, and I want to hear all about kind of how we got to that point in life by going back to the beginning, starting there and kind of building up to it. So let's start with where you did grow up.
I grew up on a farm in Belton, Missouri.
Okay.
And Belton is about maybe 45 minutes south of Kansas City. My father owned and ran an insurance agency in Kansas City, downtown Kansas City, and we moved out to a farm when I was little and raised Angus cattle. And so even though my parents grew up in Kansas City, Missouri proper, I had an opportunity to grow up out in a rural setting in that environment, which was wonderful.
And so your father obviously was having to deal with city people all the time with an insurance agency. Why would he move the family out to a farm?
Well, I think primarily because of my mother. She was kind of a farm girl, even though she didn't raise. I mean, she was out there with the cattle. In fact, they raised Hackney ponies prior to that, so they were in the horse showing business. So she was kind of favored the country living, and I think, my father went along with it. It was kind of a pain because he'd have to drive into downtown Kansas City every day to go to work. But it was kind of fun. We had lots of chickens. It wasn't a working farm. It was, chickens and cows and things like that. And, he'd take a couple dozen eggs into the office, every week and kind of hand them out. But it was primarily my mother that made that call.
Yeah. And I would guess, I'm just guessing, but that would give you as a young person a more sense of responsibility of getting up at a certain time and having chores and.
Kind of, but short of having to bale hay and take care of chickens and stuff, there wasn't, and paint and fence and things like that. It was just a wonderful opportunity to grow up, on a farm. Because you're running in the creeks and you're camping out, and it was just. My kids, we raised them quite differently, primarily in Greenville, South Carolina, which was another outstanding experience for them. But, we weren't out there on the combines, working, the cornfields.
Right.
So.
Okay. All right. And then through that, you ended up going to University of Kansas.
Yep, was graduated from the University of Kansas with a degree in journalism, advertising, and marketing. And that kind of goes back, I think we've had this conversation before about following my father's footsteps with his insurance agency. I don't know how much he enjoyed that. This was a company that bonded big contractors. I mean, it was the 3-martini lunch, high stress type of situation. And from the get-go, I found advertising and marketing very compelling and interesting. And so when I went to KU, KU's got a really strong journalism school that specializes in it. Now, MU has a great journalism school, but that's most on the news and editorial side. Didn't want to get into news and editorial. I wanted to get in the business side and the sexy side of advertising and marketing. And was graduated from KU and then had an opportunity to work at the Kansas City Star. Because my grandparents knew some of the management there that kind of helped me get in the door. But I was just right out of school and went right to work on the sales staff. And, that was a time when, versus today, you had newspapers, broadcast, television, radio, outdoor, and direct mail was just kind of the thing.
Yeah.
There wasn't any internet. There
Yeah.
wasn't any of that type of thing. And the joke was they sold with a letter opener. That was how dominant
Right.
the position of a daily newspaper was, that, it was included in just about any local, regional, or national ad plan.
Yeah.
And so actually when I started, that was the first time even started using market research data, because we had to, because the competition primarily targeted direct mail. And, so they were, it was prior to the Max, but we were selling with spec ads and ideas, whereas prior to that, literally the old timers, those guys they just were processing ad orders. So it's really started to change. I would say that's probably around, 80, 81.
Yeah. So, but prior to that, people were so sure of the power of having an ad in a newspaper
Sure.
that they just would buy them.
Think about that. I would say in some areas, the penetration level of a daily, it was probably 60, maybe 70% of the households.
Yeah.
So, and it was a good target. They had discretionary income. They were there were 2 newspapers a day.
Yeah.
So you had and 2 news cycles a day. So you had, and they were embedded in the lifestyle. I remember my parents would get up at the breakfast table. You'd have the morning newspaper.
Yeah.
The TV wasn't on. Broadcast news, where
Right.
they'd read the newspaper, come home at night,
Yeah.
and read the evening newspaper.
Right.
And that was common in just about every market, including Greenville.
I remember.
If you
It
remember
was
the Greenville, the Piedmont.
The Piedmont, yeah. I delivered that paper.
Yeah,
Back in
and
the day.
that is so common.
Yeah.
When you start talking about the newspaper business and newspapers, you'd be amazed
Yeah.
how many people, when they were younger, delivered a newspaper.
Yeah.
And I didn't, because I was way out in the country, but in markets like this. But, and what was happening is the morning newspaper tended to be, in most markets, regional and national, international news.
Yeah.
And the evening newspaper, like the Piedmont or the Kansas City Star in Kansas City, pick your market, but was the local paper.
Right.
Well, what ended up happening in the newspaper business was that when they merged the paper, they went from the Greenville News and the Piedmont, merged it in the Greenville News, kind of got away from the local news part of it, and really gravitated to regional, national, international news.
Right.
Same thing in Kansas City.
Right.
It was a little different there. It was interesting because the Kansas City Star was the evening newspaper, but it had the brand power.
So they lost the only thing that made them different.
Well, they renamed the morning paper the Star, and they merged them. But same thing. Well, what ended up happening is almost at the same time, here comes CNN.
Yeah.
And, just-in-time journalism, basically, and Desert Storm, and these newspapers found themselves as they used to have 2 cycles, publishing cycles, that they could catch more of that. But now you had one newspaper,
Right.
and you had cable news showing the tanks and the storm into Iraq and Iran, and it was 2 days late.
Right.
So that started kind of how it was starting to.
Well, so I'm trying to think. That was Ted Turner who did that, right? With
Yep.
CNN. I'm trying to think what year that was.
Well, I would say, I'm going to say it was the mid '80s.
Okay, mid '80s.
And so that's when it started to really start to change. And so in newspapers at the time, they don't do it as much anymore, but they relied heavily on market research studies. They do one a year on readers, and they do another one on advertisers. And they take all this data, and you make decisions based on it. Well, year after year, they do these readership studies and found that, I want more local news and information. Because, again, the cable guys were doing a great job in international news, regional news and national, regional, national, international news. But what people wanted most is local news.
Yeah.
I mean, on the top three, okay, local news is first, local news is second, local news is third.
Yeah.
So, I had a chance. I cut my teeth in the sales operation of the Star. It was just a fantastic opportunity because prior to the papers merging, it was still a good business. There were still advertisers that relied on print advertising, still do, frankly, to this day. I mean, it hasn't totally gone away, but learned a lot. Cap Cities ABC came in and bought the company. So got to see how a big broadcast company managed. It was very interesting.
Yeah.
Warren Buffett was part of the purchase of ABC. So Warren Buffett would be in the Kansas City Star building every once in a while. He owned one of the top distributed penetration percentage newspapers in the country in Omaha. And so, but then that kind of handwriting was on the wall. I mean, we were going away from local news and information. So, but even at the time, so I had an opportunity to move to St. Louis with my family to run a group of weeklies. That's all they did, really micro community news, and had 47 zones and 1 million circulation, and kind of made more money than it was a joint operating agreement with the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. So made as much money as the daily newspaper did in St. Louis, but again, got another dose of the significance of local community news.
So these were weekly newspapers?
Yep.
Weekly newspapers that covered different types of topics?
Well, yeah, but there were
different zones. Different zones.
So what
okay.
happened was they just started buying up that company, the
Yeah.
Journal Register company, started buying up, mom and pop papers
Right.
in St. Louis and surrounding St. Louis, and then woke up and they had distribution of, like I said, 41, but it was really micro.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like the cheerleaders are getting new uniforms. I mean, it really dug down.
Someone
that
ran over
level.
the stop sign.
Right.
Well, here, I want to back up just for a second because I'm always curious about this. In retrospect, this all makes such good sense. Because I can remember I was one of those people who, like, the first thing I did in the morning was go get the paper. I had to see what was in the paper, every damn day. And that all of a sudden that just changed. I think maybe when the phone came out or something, it was just like, there's something else. It's better. But when you were going through that, you were right in the middle of it. You majored in the journalism at a good school. You got with a good paper, and all of a sudden you all started to see that the numbers were off. You had to merge the afternoon and the
Well, there's more to it because so we were recruited from St. Louis to Greenville with multimedia and with the Greenville News.
But you were recruited from the weeklies.
Yeah, to come in and work at a daily newspaper.
Okay.
So it was kind of daily, weeklies, back to dailies.
Okay.
And it was the best experience of my life. I mean, we came rolling in here. Multimedia owned the company. Steve Brandt ran it, and I'll never forget. At the time we were looking at a big job in Denver, Colorado, and with the Denver Post, and the interview process. We go into Denver, and it's all razzmatazz, all big city stuff. We come into Greenville, South Carolina, and it's like, I remember distinctly flying out, the first time I came in, flying out of St. Louis in an ice storm. Winds blowing, nasty. Arrived at GSP. I mean, it was like 70 degrees, and this is no exaggeration.
Yeah.
All those beautiful hardwoods, the beautiful landscaping. Tom Stoltz, which was their advertising director at the time, picked me up in his convertible BMW with the top down, and we went coming rolling through. I think he took me through Thornblade, and we come rolling. I go, oh my gosh, this is. And at first, I called my wife and I said, "This is fantastic."
Yeah.
She came down with my boys, had dinner with Steve Brandt and his wife and his boys, and it was fantastic.
Just done.
And that's when multimedia owned them. Well,
Yeah.
we had a great run here because also the market was responding. Circuit City was coming. Remember Circuit City?
Yeah.
Circuit City was here. Upton's, J.B. White,
Yeah.
Belk, Rich's. You had all these big department stores running a significant amount of display advertising.
Yeah.
I mean, there was so much advertising in the Greenville News that there wasn't enough capacity, full color, full page capacity to print it all. That was the challenge.
Yeah.
It's like, how can we get all this advertising in the Sunday newspaper?
That's a good challenge to have.
Now, I mean, it's been a while. I can't remember the last time I saw a quarter-page Dillard's ad in the Greenville News. Now, they're not running with me either, but that's how these departments, how it's changed for all of us, not
Right.
just the newspaper business, but department stores and financial institutions,
So
everybody.
let's take Dillard's, for example, just since you mentioned them. Where are they putting their ad spend now?
I don't know. I've got all kinds of theories. I think during the recession and some of these times, I think they figured out that they did, well, first of all, a lot of that was driven by co-op advertising.
Okay.
So it was a Estee Lauder ad
Yeah.
that was paying for
Right.
80% of the ad. So
Okay.
I think that the dynamics changed when the co-op funding went away.
Okay.
So I think they started to, and I also think that they came to the conclusion they didn't need that much frequency in the newspaper because it's not on television and it's really not in direct mail.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's, I don't know. I
Yeah.
just don't know if that going to the mall and shopping at Dillard's or someplace like that. I think it's just like I said. I think their business model has changed
Yeah.
with online, marketing and free shipping and everything else. So it's just it's a crazy time, and we sit back in the media business going, man, this is crazy.
Yeah.
But I start looking at a lot of the advertisers, a lot of our partners, and their businesses change. I mean, take real estate. How that's changed recently. Take the financial, the banking institute. I mean, it just any segment of business today. If they're to stay in business, I mean, you can't just sit back. You've got to change and modify, your business model, and we've had to do it too.
Yeah, I think you gotta, like you say, you have to find out what they're thinking, what's really going on with them, and is there some way you can help them make it happen? Because it's not always going to be the way it always was.
Right.
So let's talk about that for a second. If you were talking, and we'll stay on Dillard's, for example. Dillard's is a department store, right? And you were talking to the main buyer for Dillard's. How would that conversation go?
Well, I think and I wish I could have it because, these guys will make wholesale decisions whether they want to put their money in broadcast or do we want to go to the daily newspapers or do we want to go to the weekly newspapers. So, John, it's a challenge from the get-go because if they've made a corporate decision that they're not going to buy weeklies or that we're not going to buy dailies, then, we're not going to buy you in Greenville and then have the guys in Charleston call up and go, hey, why aren't you advertising?
We've already decided. Yeah.
But that said, our model, first of all, we've got 22,000 targeted distribution in Greenville County. All right, so if you're sitting there pitching a daily newspaper, or heck, you could, put broadcast in there, the daily's probably at, and we got the numbers the other day, it's like less than 4,000 copies of a daily newspaper. This is another reason that they're not seeing the Dillard's money, and this is from their own. But we may want to include this, we may not. But the distribution has changed, not just in Greenville, all over the country. So, in the days that you were referring to, if Dillard's could run an ad and hit 60% of the households, but now if they're running and they can't hit 4% of the households, but that plays in my favor because I now And you couldn't target a daily newspaper. You could, you knew who kind of, back to the readership studies, you knew kind of who was reading the newspaper, didn't know where they were, didn't, they were subscribers, so that, if they're going to pay, I mean, I can give you a total pitch on dailies all afternoon, but the difference now, in 2024 is that, you're a buyer at Dillard's, I've got that base. And I can tell you exactly who they are, and I can tell you exactly what zip codes I can tell you what postal carrier routes they live in, and because of my model. We can talk about that in a minute. So the efficiency of your buy today with me is pretty strong, because these are folks ready, willing, and able to buy. They're your shoppers, and most importantly, we're not talking to people that might not come into your store necessarily, that doesn't shop at a name brand department store in Greenville, South Carolina. They might be buying off the internet. So, but I'm just one little speck in the equation, because they aren't going to make a wholesale decision just to carve me out in Greenville, regardless of how great our demographic is. So.
Okay. But if you were just talking to somebody who wanted to talk about whether or not they should advertise in one of your weekly magazines, what would be like your main point to them why they should pick that versus, let's leave out the newspaper, because I think we know why no newspaper, but maybe Facebook ads or Google ads or something like that?
Well, and we do it. I mean, so that kind of opens up another total can of worms, because first and foremost, part of our pitch is it's not just who we go to, it's who we don't go to. And so you're not burning your ad budget talking to people that'll never come in your store. So it's a much more efficient buy. And also, frankly, John, your options in this market are limited. Okay, so think about it. The daily's off the table. If you want to go broadcast, it's almost cost prohibitive. You don't see a whole lot of local. Take the attorneys off. Take the automotive companies off. You don't see a whole lot of locals on television, so that's not even an option. So outdoor, again, you're throwing up. You're getting all these drive-bys, but how many of them are going to go buy a Rolex watch? Or I mean, not even that high end. They just the targeting of that is negligible compared to what I do. So, and I've got a portfolio of products, whereas for frequency and distribution, you've got the Greenville Journal. So that comes out every week. Obviously, we've been at it for 25 years. Significant amount of brand equity. Quality content that matches up against your messaging, and quality peers and other advertisers in there. The environment, it's around for a week. This is, and I'm not going to go through the pitch on every single one, but every single one is designed to offer an advertiser what they're looking for. The brand awareness in Town Magazine is different than the benefit of frequency and distribution in the Journal. That's all in print. That's totally different than digital, because I have an idea who I go to on the reach side and the demographic for Town Magazine and the Journal and At Home and UBJ, but we dive into digital, John, and we've got analytics that can tell you exactly what they have to figure out ROI. I can't tell you how many times a print advertiser, I got to tell my boss, I got it. What's the ROI on that? You can't determine that. You can in digital. So we have to, the burden that is on us right now, the challenge is that we have to be really good in print. I mean, that's a point of differentiation on all of our products. We have to have really good writing, really good photography, really good content, really good reproduction, really good on-time delivery. It goes on and on and on. Content mostly. But then we've got to do it all again digital. I remember an advertiser asked me, they go, hey, I've got a question. They said, you've got this, you got an upstate business product, which we really enjoy reading. You also put that content online, and by the time it gets to my house, I've read most of that online. And what's up with that?
Yeah.
Well, the issue with that is I don't know who's reading me in print and who's reading me online.
Right.
So I got to be good both in print and online, and that's tough.
Yeah.
And when you start talking about online, it's just not a website. We have newsletters that come out 3 times a week on the Journal, twice a week on UBJ, and we deliver the products. So, and in the early days, when we were just figuring all this stuff out, we take our print product and just put it online. You can't do that. I mean, because you can't rate with Google. It's got all the headlines have to be rewritten, and it has to be different source, and has to. But on the flip side, online gives us a chance to append links to the city's budget. We're at an event. We take 100 photos, but I'm going to only run 10 in the paper.
Yeah.
Hey, you can push it. It's kind of like the jump. It's almost like a digital jump now from what you put in print to what you put online. So there's a significant amount of benefits, but we're a little group. We outsource a lot, but we've got maybe 30 full-time employees trying to do all this stuff.
Well, I like looking at the magazines, UBJ, the different ones. I like them because it is local. I might see something in here that could be an opportunity for me. It might be something about a friend of mine. Hell, I might be in there, and so everyone wants to see themselves, in the magazine. So I think that's great. But my question is, do you think, or do you see a point in the future where even those local magazines will be just digital?
Oh. It was just an awakening for me. I've just concluded the DLI program at Furman, the Riley Institute. We've sent our editors through it before. I wanted to see what this DEI was all about from different perspectives. So everybody gets a team project. Well, our team project, we were going to go out, this diverse group of talent that was on the team, go out to Greer Middle School and present. So I go out there, and I have my newspapers, and I put them on all the students' desks, getting ready for my presentation. Those guys came in and looked at that newspaper, like they probably look at Yellow Pages today, and it struck me that this might be the first time these guys have ever seen a newspaper. Now, they were 7th graders, and they were about 13, 14 years old, but they had no clue.
Yeah.
So I still have some runway. My average reader is probably 45, 50.
Yeah.
Even if they're 55,
Yeah.
I still have maybe 20 years with these guys.
Well, they're still going to want to open it up.
Absolutely, and there's just so much proliferation of content and places to find all this stuff digitally that there's something to be said about sitting down and reading a newspaper. I mean, it is, but you can't tell an 18-year-old that.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't even register.
Right.
So I'm still fishing in that pond, and it's still a very attractive group to the advertisers. Now, dailies have been trying to figure out how to bring a reader in forever, and we do better at that younger reader with how we edit our products. So we're trying, we with At Home Magazine, we kind of backed away from putting multi-million-dollar homes in there, and started to make it more relevant to maybe a first-time home buyer. So I can grab that young married couple maybe. When we on the move with how we edit at UBJ, that magazine that comes out once a month, we try to edit that so that we can bring some of these guys that are just starting their careers and information about those instead of being way up in the C-suite content. So we do edit all of our products, and also on the web too. I mean, these, even though our reader tends to be older, we give them opportunity to consume that content digitally too. So I think that helps us.
Okay. So you're already doing both sides of it. I guess you'll just adjust as time goes on.
Yeah, but it's going to be a time. It's like the yellow page. It's like, remember the MLS books in the real
Yeah,
estate? You try to grab one of those from a real estate agent and kind of look through those.
Yeah.
I just got hundreds of examples of this.
Yeah.
And I think eventually, well, first of all, you go back to the significance of local news. The challenge there is it's expensive. I mean, that's why, the daily newspapers, it made sense at the time to report a national, international news is because that was fed in and you just, put it on the page, no editing necessarily. I mean, really, no photography. It was all plug and play. Well, we can't do that.
Right.
I mean, even some of your questions on the list were about, AI generated stuff. Well, it's just fascinating. But if you we've run stories through there. That almost defeats the purpose. I mean, I need to interview. My people need to interview you. They need to take pictures of the studio.
Right.
You can just get 80%, but it's that last 20% that is that differentiates us. It differentiates. Local news can throw a story on and give it a minute and a half. No, I mean, we can't do that.
Well, backing up just one second, I'm sure, based on knowing you, that you're an outstanding salesperson, among other things. But can you remember back when you got your basic sales training? Did you get that in Kansas City?
Sure did.
What kind of training it was and what you learned?
Well, again, it was an interesting time because we were, like I said earlier, you were making this transition from selling literally with a letter opener to selling more with market research and ad design and concepts. But I remember when I first started, didn't start working with selling the daily newspaper. It was it was called the Wednesday Extra. And I had a boss, Mac Tully, and he came from a long line of really talented newspaper publishers and his family, so it was kind of in his blood, wasn't necessarily in mine. And his first job was, or with the paper, he managed the salespeople that sold all these zones. And I came in there fresh out of KU, worked with Mac, great experience, and I'll never forget, he took me out to Nolan Road, which would be kind of like Woodruff Road. And we started on one end of Nolan Road and called on every single business for miles. And I don't care if they sold ball bearings, and they were no way in hell would they ever see the benefit of advertising in the Wednesday Extra. But man, we went and called on them. And all the way up, for miles up there, over 3 or 4 days, and all the way back down. And John, by the time we got down to the last one, I mean, it was rote. I mean, but now that was one product, but I had heard every objection. Mac was really good, and I was off to the races. And it just taught me so much about you got to make. First of all, you got to make a whole hell of a lot of calls. I mean, and it's like on foot, park, get out, go down, calling this guy in the middle. Make sure you calling this guy. And I think that it was intense, but it was so gratifying because it was like any training session. It wasn't in a classroom, and even to this day, I'm not a big fan of somebody coming in and saying, "Hey, this is how you should do it." I'm just not. It's like, just go out there. This isn't. It's not really rocket science. It's like you learn what to say when. You learn what the closing clues are. But if you don't get out and just march through it, and if you do march through it, you just get better and better, and your closing ratio goes up, and you make more money. And And if you don't do it, then it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
You know,
I
and
think
if you
that's
don't, and if you don't enjoy it too,
Yeah.
I think if you don't find pleasure in the pursuit and the kill, it's not going to work either. You know.
Well, that's a wonderful way to do it. I mean, that's on-the-job training with a mentor with you, so you're not making the same mistake twice.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
And
right.
you can-
And you develop a friendship so that the when you walk out the door
Yeah.
and say, "Hey, what did you think?" It's pretty candid, constructive criticism,
Yeah.
and it's balanced. I learned balance too. It's like, okay, you blew it here, but oh man, you had him when you said this.
Yeah.
You know, I've learned that working with salespeople too. Is that it gives me an opportunity to just lay it on the line and go, don't ever say that again,
Yeah.
but you kind of balance it. It's like, because they learn, and again, it's not just what you learn on the call. You come out of that call, and if you're candid with one another, and you don't get your feelings hurt,
Yeah.
and initially it stings a little
Yeah, it
bit,
does.
but you learn that it's beneficial to hear it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think a lot of people do get their feelings hurt, but you know, the manager's job is to get permission, is to say, I'm going to help you get better, but I need your permission to correct you along the way. That's great. That's wonderful. I love the way you learn. Up and down Woodruff Road. God, I can't even hardly imagine. So we haven't covered one thing. So your career is actually, I can see it in my head. I mean, you majored in journalism. You got a job with a good company, Kansas City Star, and then you got recruited to go run some weekly newspapers, and you got recruited to come work for the Greenville News, right? And then at some point you left there to start Community Journal.
Yeah, so let's talk
We
about
missed that transition.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit.
This is the first time you've been an entrepreneur, really, to your own
Well,
business.
it kind of, but I was kind of a product guy anyway.
Okay.
When business, like I had a chance to work with at the Kansas City Star on the business side. It was called the Business Special. They came out with a tab on Tuesday, so I was part of that development. Newspapers in the old days, John, they had 100 special sections every year. So you're always kind of developing products and doing some things. But what happened in Greenville was that the multimedia went up for sale, and so it was, I think I wasn't that close to it, but my understanding is that the stock was sitting at whatever $35 a share. At that time, the holdings were with institutional investors, and it was kind of sitting and they put it into play, and it was common knowledge. It wasn't any big secret. There was sound reasoning behind it, and almost sold, I think, to a teachers union in Alabama, which would have been great because we would have just, and again, can't say enough about the leadership of Steve Brandt. I mean, we were rocking.
Yeah.
Greenville was growing.
Yeah.
Steve was one of the best in the business. I mean, it was just a great time. We were the flagship of all the multimedia newspapers. Vern Mevin was still here. It was just great.
Yeah.
Well, put it up for sale, and Gannett buys multimedia. And it was like, oh gosh, the antithesis of how multimedia was run. And it was like, and everybody knew it. I mean, it was just not a good situation. And then they took Steve and sent him to Rochester to do a couple things up there.
Yeah.
And I'm in Greenville with Byrne, who's another great legacy newspaper person.
Yeah.
But I thought, oh man, it was a highly centralized company as opposed to Cap Cities ABC. Cap Cities ABC that on the Star was significantly decentralized. I mean, they had their statement of decentralization on the inside cover of their annual report, which was a great environment for talented people to work in. it was just different. It went from decentralization management structure to highly centralized with Gannett. And that's when I started thinking, wow, what do I want to move? For me and my family, we'd have to move to Chicago, handle national sales or something, uproot my kids, and leave Greenville. I mean, Greenville's just gotten better and better. It was great even then.
Yeah.
And said, no, you can't go to work for another daily newspaper in Greenville, South Carolina. And they wanted to move me out, and so that's when it started to bubble up on most markets this size do have. We had like the Easily Progress and the Greer Citizen, but they had something a little bit more substantial. Saw the opportunity to do that, and one thing led to the other, and saw the opportunity to say, okay, we're going to take all this market research. We're going to say, listen, we know some things about what readers want. They want, obviously, more local news and information. They want it, instead of broadsheet form, a little more compact, full color, every page. And so we gave the readers what we wanted. The advertisers said, listen, I want a more targeted thing. I don't, it was at the time it was on the cover, it was fortuitous on the cover of Business Week magazine. It was called The Death of the Mass Market. They needed us. That was targeting, 25 years ago, literally this month. The national business press was saying, look, these advertisers are going to start targeting their message. The ad dollars are so precious. They're not going to keep blowing them. They need to know where the money's going. And again, this is before the internet, targeting everything that goes on, that opportunities exist with them now. And so the question was, could we charge enough money to make this model work? Because, like I said earlier, it's not cheap. I mean, to do this, you have to have journalistic professionals, writers, to have the quality to engage this demo that advertisers want to pay for and talk to. Well, here we jumped in with the Journal, literally 25, we're celebrating our 25th year anniversary this month, jumped in with the Journal. And then, and it's had different iterations over time, but it's pretty much, its mission is pretty much.
Did you buy something or you just started from scratch?
Started from scratch.
Wow. So you had to raise money and.
Yep.
Yeah.
We sure did. And it's so cool. Doug Greenlaw, not at the time, he had been the CEO the operating officer, the main guy running multimedia. And he had left multimedia. And I went to Doug with this idea, this concept. Never forget it. Sat out on he had met me casually. He'd presented in some of our sales meetings from a kind of a much bigger standpoint, but he was a broadcast guy. Background with MTV, Channel 1, put Channel 1 in the classrooms, out of New York, and we're down here in Greenville, South Carolina, but he was I called him up, met him on his patio, and gave him the pitch, and he was in. And that was kind of the catalyst of the whole thing, because I needed somebody with me, that could, because I'm a, people still ask me what I do. I sell advertising. That's just what I do.
Well, it's good that you don't forget that.
No, well, no, because it's what I enjoy doing. I'm not, I guess I could do the numbers in detail if I had to, but that's not what I'm good at, and that's not the best contribution I can make to the company. But anyway, so Doug was in, but we needed a couple more people, and got Leighton Cubbage jumped in. He was fresh off of his selling his mobile phone company, and he's a character,
Yeah.
and it's exactly what we need. I mean, just fired it up and let's go
Be
do
the
it.
best journal in the whole country.
Yeah, he keep coming.
I love him. He's been on the podcast.
Yeah, and so if he's been on the podcast recently, that is a tempered down Leighton Covey. I mean, in the old days, we were just bouncing off the walls, and that's exactly what we needed back then.
Yeah.
And Doug was there with me. And I'll never forget, he goes, I'm in. He goes, listen, I'm going to be there as much or as little as you need me. And to this day, he's honored up to that. I mean, I remember when we were going through the recession, and it was awful because our bank at the time, we're trying to keep the boat afloat, but our bank at the time was jamming us to make these massive principal payments, or they wouldn't renew us.
Yeah.
And they were jamming us because we could pull it off. It was miserable. We could pull it off, whereas they had some other clients down on the beach that, regardless of the amount of pressure they put on them. But Doug was right there, and he was like, he was a Vietnam lieutenant in Vietnam, and he was definitely a calming force in the whole thing. I'll never forget. I've told this story many times. It was the darkest day during the recession. The banks are on us, and he goes, well, look at it this way. He goes, at least they're not shooting at you. And it was like, it was really helped me because it's like, listen, we'll get through this. Yeah. We're not going to die on this, taking this hill. We'll figure this thing out. Yeah. And we did, but it was brutal, but and the great thing about Greenville, South Carolina, man, our advertisers, they hung in there with us. I mean, it was, and then, but we don't forget those guys that hung in there with us. So they still get, as much attention as we can give them. And if an advertiser falls on tough times, we're probably a lot more forgiving than we would have been if we hadn't gone through that experience, especially with small businesses. And most of our clients, we have 400, through all of our products, we probably have 400 plus active different advertisers that run in one or more of our products. Right. And they're all little guys that are sometimes fighting for their lives, and it's very gratifying to have those type of partnerships. And all that came out of the recession,
Well, just to summarize real quick, for the listeners, I think one of the things that challenges me that I try to unlock is we see someone like yourself running this great enterprise, helping out so many people in Greenville, over 400 advertisers, multiple weekly magazines. They're all good. And they think, I want to be like that guy. But just to back it up and figure out how you did it, it really wasn't that complicated. You majored in journalism at a good school. You picked a career. Most people struggle with that. You went to the first good job you could get in the area, Kansas City. You got recruited to another good place. You got recruited to Greenville. And it seems to me you probably would be very happy continuing being the boss of Greenville or national sales manager or whatever, had things stayed the same.
Right.
But they changed. They changed for the worse for anyone who worked there because of who bought them. So what you could have done is you could have complained about it, and you could have whined about it. You could have been an unhappy man, for the rest of your life. But you decided to make a change and do something different, to have your own business, to raise money, to get, take all those chances, and now look what you've built.
Well, and listening to you put it that way, thinking it through, the daily newspapers at the time weren't very innovative because they didn't have to be. Right. That's all changed, but at the time, it's like, hey, but how about this? Oh, we don't need to do that. Or how about this? We don't need to do that. It's like, why? We've got this reader base, this advertiser base. Yeah. We don't need to do it. They got so complacent that because it was just it happened over a period of time, but it was like, no, this is changing. We've got to do different stuff or try different stuff. And even if we still had the market position, I just would get antsy. Right. It's like, look, I'm coming down. Here's I'm leaving for the holidays. I'm going to walk down this hall, and then on the 5th of January, I'm going to walk back down this hall and do the same thing. I didn't want to do that, but
right.
I think the biggest thing here that separates it is the degree you can handle risk. And I think for a lot of people, no way. I mean, you know, those big corporate jobs were very good. These were big, at the time, Gannett was like $6-7 billion. I mean, it was a big company. Cap Cities ABC, very successful, rock solid. You know, had capital budgets every year. If you needed new delivery trucks or new PC, it went in the budget. You know, but for us, this model, we thought that it made sense based on the research that this is what the readers wanted, this is what the advertisers wanted, this is how much we have to charge for it. Will this work? And so it's like, hey, if my wife has been with me, come hell or high water, regardless. And you know, and that's where the excitement comes. I mean, you gotta have something that drives you to get up every day and look forward to, and get out there and go after what. And I don't care if you're selling from an established medium or not, or it's your own new product. But I had my family behind me. You're going to talk to Ryan at some point. He was the biggest critic, you know. So I had Ryan. I had Doug and Lynn Greenlaw behind me. I had Leighton behind me. And it was just a really good, the market was continued, it has never stopped since that. So there were a lot, and Greenville is a very benevolent community. I mean, we spent some time in Charleston because 6 AM City has a newsletter down there, and the people that in the ad agencies and the client base were comparing and contrasting the benevolence of a Charleston base versus Greenville. I said it's not even you can't even compare. That has experience in both. How supportive Greenville is, and I think that helps people like me. That helps me get off the ground. It helps 6 AM City get off the ground. All these the new companies that are starting up at Next in some of these areas. It's the environment. So a lot of things, John, went right for us. You know, and today I don't know. I don't know if we could ever pull that off.
Well, let me just try to summarize one more time after what you just said, then we can move on and we can finish up. But, you know, most of the people that watch this show would like to be entrepreneurs, CEOs, build nice companies. They want to do that. And one of the things that you did that I recommend to people is you picked a craft, you learned it, you got some experience in it, and then you launched a company.
But I also, that's what I enjoyed doing. I think a lot of times, what you got to figure out is, if I'm talking to classrooms, had a great opportunity for a few years ago to speak at the MBA class at Clemson. It's like, start with whatever the hell you enjoy doing, and go for. I mean, if you got to go in and work for free and pour the coffee, do it. I mean, especially if you're young. I mean, you know, what do you got to learn? I mean, and that's another thing. I wanted to get into advertising and marketing, and this was my way to do it. I didn't want a boss my whole career. I wanted to call the shots myself. I didn't want to bring ideas and go, I don't have to, you know, necessarily do that, because we're in a really strong marketing position that you might not be in forever. I like the way things walk and talk, you know. So I created that for myself, and that would be my advice. It's like, whatever. I mean, if you like making skateboards, go make skateboards.
Jump in it.
I mean, why not? You know, and then find talent that if you're the guy making the skateboard, find somebody that can sell them, or find somebody that can handle your books, or find out some investors that want to get into music, that want to invest in recording studios, or whatever it is. You know, and that we talk about that the interview with Edwin McCain in this most recent issue of Town. It's fantastic, fantastic. And he talks a little bit about that. He wanted to be a musician.
Yeah.
Dad didn't want him to. It's like,
Right.
hey,
Right.
let's see what happens. So he didn't go do something he didn't want to do.
Yeah. Well, Dr. McCain made the mistake of teaching Edwin how to play the guitar.
That was
his mistake. Yeah.
got it going.
So let me ask you this. I know you've probably read a lot of books. What's your all-time favorite book?
Well, I like historical nonfiction, and I read just about anything that Tom Wolfe writes, just anything that Richard Russo writes. I'm reading a book right now. I wrote it down. It just came out, and it's called all Eric Larson stuff. It's
Okay.
called The Demon of the it's called the Demon of the Unrest.
Okay.
It's about I'm about 2/3 through it. It's about how the Civil War started.
Huh.
And actually, I had no idea how big a role South Carolina played in it. But all these books, Devil in the White City, all that stuff, Bonfires of the Vanity.
I read that one, yeah.
I mean, all of those books by Tom Wolfe, I really enjoy. So
Tom Wolfe, okay.
but I'll throw something else in there. But when I grew up in a rural high school, the education was, history, not that much of it. And then I went to journalism school, no history.
Yeah.
It was all writing and especially when I got into the advertising side. So I'm kind of trying to make up for, what I probably should have learned in high school and college.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you like reading it too. What about your favorite word?
Well, yeah, this has been a good experience for me. So I think it's passion, and I would throw enthusiasm in with that to
Okay.
kind of go. And I've seen that with the many sales, it's not even salespeople, just people doing their jobs. If they're coming to work, and they're just trying to make a little bit of money, and if they don't have the drive, a certain level of fire in their gut, and if they can't get enthusiastic about what they're not going to sell anything.
Right.
I mean, and so it's kind of like, I've relied on that myself, that if I can get really enthusiastic about something and I'm passionate about it and I can communicate that, I mean, but on the opposite side, if you can't, you better be damn good at organization and process and all this stuff, and there's benefits to that too. Right. So there's kind of a give and take that, passion and enthusiasm for whatever you're doing. I mean, it could be whatever.
Yeah.
It could be, but I'll relay it directly to selling. That's not the end all, but that can carry you a long way.
It can. It can. I consider it almost the ante to get in the game. Like,
Right.
You better be excited about what you're doing. Then after that, learn the product, learn the ROI, learn everything else. What about music-wise? Who's your favorite band?
It's interesting. I grew, again, back to my upbringing. I grew up with, out in the country with Marshall Tucker Band and Willie Nelson and all those guys. But I'm kind of stuck in, the radio stations, the country music stations, or NPR, and I have a fairly young team I work with, and I haven't grown out of the oldies
Right.
it's pretty diverse. I grew up with basically a hippie at KU that was a music nut. So he kind of all over the place, all over the different genres. So I couldn't say that that I have any favorite band but I would probably say country music. Is probably my
old school
go-to.
country music.
Right.
Now, did you know? I think this is right that Marshall Tucker is a local
Absolutely,
band.
yeah.
And that they named the band after their science teacher.
Yeah, that's right.
His name was Marshall Tucker, and just
Yeah.
as a joke, they named it after
Yeah,
him.
yeah. But then again, you've got. I also grew up in a time of a kind of auditorium or arena rock. So you'd have Heart and Bad Company,
Oh, yeah.
and all these guys roll into these, like Arrowhead in Kansas City.
Yeah.
I remember we were at like some crazy concert, Head East. Remember all those
I
guys?
don't remember that one, but
So I was sitting there, and this is no exaggeration. It was just packed.
Yeah.
And this watermelon comes flying out. I mean, a whole watermelon like crashed. I'm thinking, but at the time at Arrowhead, we saw the Eagles were there. Michael Jackson was there. That's all. I guess they're still doing that. The big guys are still selling out arenas, but that was kind of the go-to at the time.
That's fun. That's fun. Well, we've talked a lot about your different magazines. Is there anything you want to specifically promote today? Any specific magazine or any cause you're working on?
No, I mean, I think after 25 years, the challenge of Greenville is that we basically fish in Greenville, and I think at this stage of the game, a lot of the folks that we want advertising with us are advertising with us. And that's good news, and it's also kind of a challenge because what do you do? Now, digital offers us an opportunity we could handle an advertiser anywhere in the world on the digital platforms, and we do. Two of our largest advertisers are digital marketing service clients that don't even have properties here. So thank God for digital, because we're maintaining revenue and readership are in the journal in our products, but we have to. We launched 2 new products this year, and they both were hits. Sometimes they're not. We launched a nonprofit magazine that turned out great. A lot of recognition from the nonprofit community, and I think we're helping them get their word out. We also, another advertiser organization-driven product, we launched Arts Upstate. That was in response to a lot of these performing and visual arts organizations that said, listen, we need to get our schedules out. We need, we can run display ads and say, okay, we've got Jasper Johns running at this time, but we need to let them know for the next 6 months as they're planning what's going on. So we came out with a magazine. We're going to do that twice a year. But another thing, just information that some of your viewers don't know, is that a lot of what we do, you'll never see. I mean, some of our best work is with our Cliffs publications. We publish twice a year the magazine for the membership of the Cliffs communities. Beautiful, top-of-the-line magazine. We also, for all the McConnell golf properties around the country, we publish their magazine. Friends of Lake Kiwi, we publish their magazine. I mean, it's just... the school district, we published their class acts, and we just published the Teacher of the Year type of stuff. So that's in addition to 52 journals in 12 towns and 12 UBJs and 4 at-home magazines, and it goes on and on and on. It's to keep the boat afloat, because it takes that amount of talent. I mean, we're delivering the journal anyway, so UBJ rides along with it. So, no, I don't necessarily have anything I want to pitch because I have to restrain myself in interviews like this so the whole conversation isn't one big pitch. That's what I told my team. I said, I'm going to talk to John, and I've got to have a dialogue with him, and it can't be all, hey, this is why you need to advertise in the Greenville Journal.
You did a pretty good job, I would say, but you did promote the journal very well.
Well, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
So, there are some aha moments for me in selling, and I'll share one with you. You can share one with me.
Sure.
With me. I was just starting selling advertising, and these are these aha moments, And I found myself in front of Jim Salerno in Kansas City, and this guy probably had 5 did lion's share of the flooring business in Kansas City. And I didn't know anything. And so I'm in there, sitting in his office, talking to this Salerno guy, and I'm pitching him, and he's listening to me, and I'm pitching him, he's listening to me. And he goes, well, what do you think I should do? And he goes, before you answer that, he goes, I'm going to take it under serious consideration. And if it doesn't work for me, then I'm not going to do anything else. So whatever you're going to recommend better be your best thought and concepts, because, and you know what? That happened. I learned a lesson, and he was huge advertiser. And I scored some brownie points because I brought in this monster client to the newspaper and became a very good friend. I took care of him. But on the flip side of that coin, I learned that if I go in, I'm talking to you and you're blowing me off, then, you lose because, I could say all kinds of things. I found the smartest people would listen to me rant and rave and take bits and pieces of that, of what they could learn. But if somebody just, listens to me and says, see you later, I'll give you a call, I learned a lesson too. So back to you, what in your career on the sales side of things or customer relations side, what were a couple of your aha moments?
Well, one big one that every new sales rep ought to know, and I went through it, is when you start out, unless you have a really, really good training program, which I did not, your tendency is to be a little nervous and to start the conversation by saying, let me tell you what we do. Let me show you who we are. Let me show you some slides of how long we've been in business. And I know now there's this glaze people have in their eyes. They're trying to be polite, but you can just see them just kind of drifting off quietly because they could care less. What they want, and what I learned was they want you to say, before we get into all that, I really came to hear what's going on with you and your company, why you'd want to talk to me. What is the situation here? Where are you trying to take it? What's that gap look like? Let's see if we can uncover something where I might be able to help. I don't know if I can or not. So completely save all the stuff about me until the end, if at all. I want to find out about them first.
Well,
so that's
that's one of the hardest things to train anybody to do. Is to find the hurt, the parts of where they need some help. Because if you can't, you're just blowing smoke. But that's hard. That's hard to do when you're in there. You want to tell them about what you're doing.
It's just, but I think a lot of that is habit and training. I mean, it still happens to this day. I was on a call with a new potential vendor yesterday, and they said, well, we usually like to start by telling you about who we are. And I'm like, well, if you want to lose the sale, go right ahead. Why don't you ask me about who I am? What am I looking for? And, I've worked with your salespeople before, and they've done a good job of at least starting out with what's your situation? What are you looking to accomplish?
Well, and that's another thing. We didn't get into it, but I noticed in your notes is that, what are some of the challenges? I tell you what, and I'm getting to believe that we're a dying breed. I don't know what's going on, but we're rolling out of the Gen Zs into the alphas, and I don't know what we're going to do. I cannot find the talent that guys like me rolling in, bright-eyed, bushy-tail, ready to do whatever it takes. It's hey, no, I'm not going to do that. You have wellness days, and you got to really try to drag people to all these culture-building situations and organizations that we relied on in the past. They're not going to do it. I mean, they just. It's not necessarily a criticism. It's a reality. They're going to go home to their families. They're not going to go. I remember there was a bar right across the street from the Kansas City Star. It was called the Pub, like original. I mean, we'd go over there. Yeah, we'd get out at 5:30, go over there, have all that just doesn't exist anymore, and it's a challenge for and kind of the work at home thing. It's like. That's where in that critical piece of building culture and communication and collaboration, it's hard. Maybe it's just, my age and at this stage of my career, but I
think we can finish on this, but I think that it's different. Okay, it's a different group of people. They get information so much faster than we do. I mean, than we did. We were kind of counting on being together, doing stuff together, being in the office, working hard. They can kind of gather about 80% of it online somehow. And then in terms of finding the people that you want to be go-getters, I just think it's going to be a little harder. You have to work harder than we're used to working to find them, meaning you have to go to the places where they are, like the colleges or wherever. Out of a school of 20 journalism majors that are about to graduate, talk to the class, find the 2 that you like, and bring them in.
Yeah, we don't do, we could do a better job. I
You
think.
could,
Yeah.
you could. But anyway, I'm so glad you carved some time out for us today, and for the listeners, because you have a great story. You stuck with kind of the main thing the whole time through, which is great. And almost whenever I interview or even know someone who picked something that they loved to do early on, got trained up in it, worked for a couple of good managers, and then went on their own, they're all successful.
Yeah.
So anyway, there's one way to do it. It's not overnight, but
Right.
it is one way to do it. But thank you for being here, and maybe come back in a year or so and give us an update
My
sometime.
pleasure. Thanks,
All right.
John, for
Thank you,
having me.
man.
I appreciate it.